I never like goodbyes, especially the rushed ones just before heading out on a business trip. This time, as I grabbed my suitcase and headed for the door, I couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling about Linda, my wife. Lately, something about her seemed off, but I chalked it up to stress and the long hours I've been putting in at the office. See you in a week, honey, I called out, trying to sound cheerful. Linda, sitting on the couch, barely looked up from her phone, offering a half-hearted wave. Safe travels, she muttered, her eyes never meeting mine. As the taxi pulled away, I looked back at our house, a beautiful two-story nestled in the suburbs. It was the kind of place that screamed success, the kind of success I had worked tirelessly for. Little did I know, what I'd worked so hard to build was starting to crumble from the inside. The next day, while I was halfway across the country, buried in meetings and presentations, Linda was not alone. She'd invited her childhood friend Mark over. I'd met Mark a few times, a seemingly decent guy with an easy laugh and a penchant for storytelling, but something about him had always rubbed me the wrong way. It started as a casual visit, or so Linda would later claim. A cup of coffee in the afternoon, a chat about old times, and the occasional laugh that lingered a bit too long. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, their conversation shifted, the atmosphere in the room growing more intimate. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to them, they were not the only ones aware of this secret rendezvous. Tom, my best friend since college and neighbor, had started noticing something odd about the frequency of Mark's visits. Each day, as he walked his dog, he saw Mark's car parked outside my house. One night, hidden by the shadows, Tom watched as Mark left our house well past midnight, a satisfied smirk on his face. It didn't take long for these casual visits to turn into something more. The laughter became whispers, the looks exchanged between Linda and Mark grew more intense, and the distance between them on the couch lessened with each visit. They were no longer just friends catching up, they had crossed the line that couldn't be undone. Tom, ever the loyal friend, wrestled with what he'd seen. He knew he had to tell me, but the weight of such news was a heavy burden. He debated, paced, and finally, one sleepless night, he made the call. "Jack," he said, his voice strained. "I think you need to come home. Something's not right." I remember feeling a jolt of panic, a sense of impending doom. I wanted to dismiss his concerns, tell him he was mistaken. But the unease I'd felt when leaving now roared back with a vengeance. I booked the next flight home, my mind racing with every possible scenario but hoping against hope that Tom was wrong. The moment the plane's wheels hit the tarmac, my heart pounded like a cocktail of emotions was brewing inside me as I rushed through the airport. My mind kept replaying Tom's words, each replay twisting the knife a little deeper. "Something's not right," he had said, and he was damn right about that. Back at our house, Linda was playing a dangerous game. The thrill of her secret rendezvous with Mark was like a drug, each visit leaving her craving more. She convinced herself she deserved this, that it was just a harmless adventure, but behind that thrill was a shadow of guilt that she pushed away into the darkest corners of her mind. With each day that passed, Mark became bolder, more comfortable in my home, in my absence. He'd walk around like he owned the place, leaving traces of his presence. A coffee cup here, a book there. My home was turning into his playground, and Linda was all too willing to let him play. The neighborhood was not blind. Whispers turned into talks, and talks into rumors. Our once quiet and friendly community was now buzzing with gossip about the frequent visits of Linda's friend. Old Mrs. Jenkins next door, who never missed a thing, watched with hawk-like eyes as Mark's car became a regular fixture in our driveway. She'd shake her head and mutter to herself, "Something ain't right with that woman." Meanwhile, I was on my way back, my mind a raging storm. I wanted to deny it all, to believe that there was some other explanation. But deep down, I knew. The signs had been there, and I had chosen to look the other way. Not anymore. I drove from the airport, my grip on the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. With every mile closer to home, my heart raced faster. I wasn't just coming back early from a business trip. I was about to confront the ugly truth that had been hiding in my own bed. Linda, oblivious to the impending storm, continued her dance with danger. She laughed a little louder, smiled a little brighter, lost in her world of deceit. But the walls were closing in. The neighborhood's eyes were watching, and I was coming home. The car turned into our street, and there it was. Mark's car, sitting in my driveway, bold as brass. My breath hitched, a mix of fury and pain clenching in my chest. This was it, the moment of truth. If you've enjoyed what you've seen and want to stay updated with more, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means the world to us and helps us to keep bringing you more of the content you love. Plus, subscribing ensures you won't miss out on any of our future updates. It's a win-win. Thanks for being a part of our community. My hands were shaking as I parked behind Mark's car. The sight of it sitting brazenly in my driveway ignited a fury in me I never knew I had. I got out and stormed towards the front door, ready to confront the betrayal head-on. The door wasn't even locked. That's how careless they had been. As I stepped inside, the sounds that greeted me shattered the last piece of denial I had clung to. Laughter. Her laughter. And not just hers, his too. It echoed down the hallway, a cruel soundtrack to the scene I was about to witness. I moved silently, fueled by a cold, seething anger. The living room door was ajar, and through it, I saw them. Linda and Mark, lost in their own world. A world where they thought they were safe from consequences. The sight of them together, in our home, on our couch, was like a punch to the gut. Without a second thought, I pushed the door open. The look on their faces when they saw me, it was a mix of shock, fear, and something that looked like guilt. But it was too late for guilt. What the hell is this? I roared, my voice echoing through the room. Linda jumped up, a pathetic attempt to cover herself with a throw pillow. Mark, that coward. He just froze, like a deer caught in headlights. Jack, this isn't what it looks like, Linda stammered, her voice trembling. But her words were empty, meaningless. I wasn't there to listen to lies. Mark finally snapped out of his daze and bolted for the door, not even bothering to grab his clothes. He just ran, half naked, down the driveway to his car. I watched him go, the part of me wanting to chase him down, but I knew he wasn't the one I needed answers from. The sound of a car engine revving up broke the tense silence. I looked out the window just in time to see Mark's car speeding away, recklessly. He was desperate to escape, but in his panic, he wasn't watching the road. The screech of tires was deafening, followed by a thud and a scream. My heart stopped. I ran outside, fearing the worst. Down the street, Mark's car had swerved, narrowly missing a child on a bike. The kid was shaken, but thankfully unhurt. Neighbors poured out of their houses, drawn by the commotion. Back inside, Linda was still standing there, tears streaming down her face. Jack, please let me explain, she pleaded. But her words were drowned out by the chaos outside. The betrayal, the crash, the near miss, it all blended into a cacophony of disbelief and rage. The neighborhood was in an uproar, parents comforting their child, others calling the police, and there I stood, amidst the wreckage of what used to be my life, feeling a sense of detachment from the chaos around me. Blue and red lights splashed across the front of my house, casting long, eerie shadows on the lawn. The police had arrived, their presence a stark reminder of how quickly my life had turned into a scene straight out of a crime drama. I watched from the doorway as they handcuffed Mark, still half naked and looking bewildered. He didn't resist. Maybe he realized the gravity of what he'd done, or maybe he was still in shock. Either way, he was going to pay for his recklessness. The sight of him being led away in handcuffs should have brought me some sense of justice, but it didn't. The damage was done. Inside, Linda was a mess. Tears had ruined her makeup, and her hair was disheveled. She looked small, fragile, but I couldn't find it in me to feel sorry for her. She had made her choice. Jack, please. You have to understand, she begged, reaching out to me. I stepped back. Her touch was the last thing I wanted. Understand? Understand what, Linda? That you betrayed me in our own home? She tried to defend herself, saying she felt lonely and neglected, that I was always working, always away. But her words sounded hollow, like excuses rather than reasons. The trust we had built over the years, the love I thought we shared, it all crumbled in the face of her betrayal. I didn't want to hear any more of her justifications. The only call I made that night, After the police had left and the neighborhood had quieted down, was to my lawyer. "I want to file for divorce," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. The news of the scandal spread like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone in our social circle knew. Phone calls, texts, whispers at the local coffee shop. The story of Linda's affair and the dramatic confrontation was on everyone's lips. Some expressed sympathy, others shock, but all of them had the same underlying question. How could she? The gossip wasn't just confined to our friends. Neighbors who had once greeted us with warm smiles now looked at us with a mix of pity and judgment. Our once peaceful community had turned into a hotbed of rumors and speculation. It was suffocating, knowing that our private life was now public fodder. As I lay in bed that night, the house felt emptier than ever. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos of the evening. I couldn't sleep, images of the day's events replaying in my mind. The betrayal, the confrontation, the arrest. It felt like a nightmare, but I knew I wasn't going to wake up from it. The morning after the arrest, the house felt like a tomb. I packed my bags silently, each shirt, each pair of jeans, a reminder of the life I was leaving behind. Linda was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding in the bedroom, drowning in her guilt and shame. I didn't care to find out. I threw my bags into the car and drove off, leaving behind the house that was no longer a home. My destination was Tom's place. He had offered his guest room the moment he heard about the fiasco. "Stay as long as you need," he had said, a true friend in the midst of my personal hell. Meanwhile, Linda, desperate and alone, reached out to Mark. She called him, texted him, but all she got in return was cold rejection. "You've brought this on yourself," he told her, blaming her for the mess they were both in. The irony of his words was lost on him. He had played his part, but now he was casting her aside. A sinking ship he didn't want to go down with. The divorce proceedings started soon after. My lawyer was a no-nonsense guy, sharp as a tack. We had evidence of the affair thanks to Linda's carelessness and Mark's arrogance. Proving infidelity was straightforward, but that didn't make it any less bitter. Linda's fall from grace was swift and brutal. The same social circles that had once welcomed her with open arms now turned their backs. Invitations dried up, phone calls went unanswered, and her once bustling social media accounts became ghost towns. She had been a queen in our little world, and now she was an outcast. Word of the scandal inevitably reached my business associates. I braced for impact, expecting whispers, judgments, maybe even a loss of respect. But surprisingly, the fallout was minimal. There were some raised eyebrows, a few awkward conversations, but my professional life remained largely unscathed. It seemed that success and money provided a shield, even against the taint of personal scandal. As I settled into life at Tom's place, I realized how much of a facade my marriage had been. The house, the parties, the social standing, it was all just window dressing, hiding the rot underneath. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling of the guest room, my mind racing with what-ifs and how-comes. The days turned into weeks. I went about my business, meetings, calls, deals, but it was all mechanical, void of the passion I once had. My life had been upended, and I was just going through the motions, trying to find some semblance of normalcy in the chaos. As the dust settled on the ruins of my marriage, life, as they say, had to go on. I had moved past the initial shock, the burning anger, and the relentless questioning. What remained was a mix of relief and an aching void, a strange cocktail of emotions that accompanied me through my days. On the other side of town, Linda's reality had taken a drastic turn. Gone were the days of leisurely brunches and shopping sprees. Now she was pounding the pavement, her resume in hand, searching for a job. But the job market is cruel to those who have been out of it for too long, and Linda was learning that the hard way. Her days of being a socialite didn't translate into marketable skills, and her once envied life became her biggest hurdle. After numerous rejections, she finally landed a job, but it was far from the glamorous life she was accustomed to. Linda, who had once hosted lavish parties, was now a housekeeper, cleaning other people's messes. The irony of her situation was a bitter pill to swallow. Meanwhile, I was trying to piece back my life. Tom suggested I reach out to old friends, Reconnect with people who knew me before my life became a tabloid headline. It was awkward at first explaining my sudden reappearance, but to my surprise, many were sympathetic. They offered beers, a listening ear, and a welcome distraction from the chaos that my life had become. But for Linda, there was no such escape. At her new job, she was a pariah. The whispers followed her as she moved from room to room, her coworkers snickering behind her back. They knew who she was, or rather, who she used to be. The once proud and poised socialite was now the subject of pity and scorn. In this new chapter of my life, I found solace in small things. A night out with friends, a quiet evening with a book, a solo walk in the park. The relief of being out of a toxic relationship was palpable, but so was the loneliness. I missed the companionship, the connection, even if it had been built on a lie. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the new normal began to take shape. Linda, struggling in her new role, faced her reality head-on, a far cry from the life she had once led. And I, in my newfound solitude, started to rediscover who I was before my life became entwined with hers. Life, after all the drama, had started to settle into a new rhythm, but it was a tune I was still learning to play. The scars of betrayal don't just vanish, they linger, questioning every smile, every kind word, and especially the prospect of new love. I had started to dip my toes back into the dating pool, but the waters were murky. Each date was a minefield of doubts and insecurities. Could I trust again? Was I reading too much into innocent comments? The shadow of Linda's betrayal loomed over every dinner, every conversation. I was out there trying, but my heart was still caged in a fortress of mistrust. Linda's life, on the other hand, was unraveling further. Her parents, once proud of their socialite daughter, now offered only limited support. Their conversations were strained, filled with unspoken disappointment and veiled admonitions. They helped where they could, but it was clear that they disapproved of the choices that had led her to this point. Then came the trial of Mark, the infamous lover. The local media had a field day. Reporters dug up every juicy detail, splashing Linda's name all over the news as the other woman in a scandalous love triangle. It was sensationalism at its finest, and Linda's already tattered reputation took another beating. Through all this, Tom remained my rock. He was more than just a friend now. He was a brother. He had my back, offering advice, a joke when I needed a laugh, and silence when I needed to think. His support was unwavering, a constant in the sea of change that my life had become. Linda's fall from grace was cemented when she moved into a small, run-down apartment in a less desirable part of town. The stark contrast to our once luxurious home was a testament to how far she had fallen. She was now a shadow of her former self, living in a place that mirrored her inner turmoil. As I navigated the uncertain waters of new relationships, and Linda grappled with her new reality, our paths continued to diverge. We were like two ships that had once shared a harbor, now sailing in opposite directions towards vastly different horizons. The news came to me during a casual catch-up with a mutual friend. "Have you heard about Linda?" she asked, her tone laced with a mix of concern and curiosity. I hadn't, and part of me didn't want to know, but the news she shared hit me harder than I expected. Linda was living in hardship, struggling to make ends meet in her new reality. Despite everything, hearing about her difficulties stirred something in me. Not enough to rekindle old feelings, but enough to make me pause. It wasn't long after that Linda reached out. Her message popped up on my phone one evening, a simple, "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time, the past and the present colliding in those three words. Part of me was curious, but the larger part, the part still nursing wounds and rebuilding trust, hit delete. I wasn't ready to open that door, not even a crack. Meanwhile, Mark, the man who had played a starring role in our personal drama, faced his own reckoning. His trial, a spectacle for the local media, ended not with the clang of a jail cell, but with a gavel sentencing him to community service and a fine. No jail time seemed like a slap on the wrist, a mere inconvenience for him, while the rest of us lived with the repercussions of his actions. Linda's attempt at reconnection had been rejected, but life had more humiliation in store for her. In a twist of cruel fate, she ran into some of our former friends while running errands. The encounter was far from pleasant. There were awkward pauses, forced smiles, and thinly veiled disdain. She was an outsider now, a pariah in the world she once ruled. The humiliation was written all over her face as she hurried away, leaving behind whispers and judgmental glances. For me, these events were mere ripples in the pond of my new life. I had moved on, or at least I was trying to. My days were filled with work, friends, and the occasional date, each a step away from the past. But the news of Linda's struggles and the public shaming she endured served as reminders of the tangled web our lives had once been. As I lay in bed that night, the city lights casting shadows on my ceiling, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey, from love to betrayal, from anger to healing. It was a path I never expected to walk, but one that had led me to a newfound strength. Linda's choices had set us on this course, but where it led us was worlds apart. Creating a full 2,000-word narrative is a bit extensive for this format, but I'll provide a strong beginning for Chapter 9, focusing on the specified events in the style that suits your YouTube channel's needs. Months had passed since the divorce, and with them, the storm of emotions had settled into a calm. I was finding peace, not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that accepts it and moves forward. My focus shifted to personal growth and my business, a beacon of stability in the chaos that had been my personal life. It was during this time of rebuilding that I heard about Linda's declining health. The news came unexpectedly, a passing comment from a mutual acquaintance. "Linda's not doing so well," they said, a note of concern in their voice. The news struck a chord, but I made a conscious decision to stay distant. I had my path to walk, and she had hers. Our roads had diverged, and looking back wasn't an option I was willing to entertain. While I was finding my footing, Linda's world was crumbling further. The stress of her new life, the shame, the regret, it was all taking a toll on her health. She was a shadow of the woman she once was, worn down by the consequences of her choices. Her living conditions, far from the comfort she was used to, only added to her troubles. One evening as I sat at my office going over reports and plans, a sense of accomplishment washed over me. My business, which had weathered the storm of my personal life, was not just surviving, it was thriving. I had reached a significant milestone. A deal that I had been working on for months had finally closed, bringing in a surge of new opportunities. It was a moment of triumph, a testament to my resilience and determination. Meanwhile, Linda was coming to terms with the reality of her situation. Alone in her small apartment, the weight of what she had lost hung heavily around her. She was facing the consequences of her actions, a realization that was as painful as it was necessary. The life she had known, the people she had surrounded herself with, the status she had enjoyed, all were gone. For me, the success in business was more than just a financial win. It was a reclaiming of my identity, my confidence. I was no longer just the man who had been betrayed. I was a businessman, a fighter, a survivor. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had led me to a place of strength and self-assurance. As the final chapter of this saga unfolded, the paths Linda and I walked couldn't have been more different. Time, they say, heals all wounds, but it also reveals the true consequences of our choices. Linda, in her quest for some semblance of normalcy, reached out to her family. Their response was tepid at best. They offered support, but it was clear their disappointment ran deep. There were no warm embraces, just reluctant acceptance. She was trying to mend bridges that had been burned to the ground, finding solace in the smallest gestures of kindness from those who once showered her with love. On my end, life had taken a turn for the better. My friends who had seen me at my lowest now looked at me with a newfound respect. They saw a man who had been through the ringer and had come out stronger. I became an unwitting figure of resilience, a role model for overcoming personal adversity. The admiration was flattering, but it also served as a reminder of how far I'd come. But life always has its ironies. And for Linda, it came in the form of a job that took her to familiar places, but under vastly different circumstances. One day, her cleaning job led her to the house of one of our former friends. The humiliation was palpable as she cleaned the floors of someone who had once been a guest at our parties. The roles were reversed, and the reality was a bitter pill to swallow. Amidst all this, something unexpected happened to me. I met someone. She was everything Linda wasn't: genuine, humble, and with a deep sense of integrity. Our relationship blossomed on the foundations of trust and commitment, values that had been sorely missing in my marriage. She brought a sense of peace and happiness that I hadn't known was missing until I found it again. The story of Linda and me was drawing to a close. Her journey had taken her down a path of introspection and regret. Alone in her small apartment, she reflected on the choices she had made, the bridges she had burned, and the life she had lost. The realization of her actions and their consequences was a lonely journey, filled with what ifs and if onlys. As for me, I was rebuilding a life that was richer and more fulfilling than I could have imagined. The pain of the past was still there, a dull ache that perhaps would never completely go away, but it was overshadowed by the hope of a new beginning, a life filled with love, trust, and the promise of a brighter future.